I did a practice run for a colleague yesterday of his presentation, and he said, "Why have you got the Libyan flag as your first slide?" I hadn't thought of that, so I'm just going to talk. I'm a communications officer. I work for the ESRC STEPS Centre, which researches how to make sustainability and science and technology work for people in developing countries. And one of the things we're most interested in is if the big stories we tell ourselves and what the alternatives to those stories might be. Because we use big stories to make sense of a world that's increasingly complex and changing very fast, and where everything seems to be chaotic. The climate's changing, we need to feed more people than ever, demand for electricity is growing massively. I think sometimes big stories are used to reassure people that someone's in charge. When we're told we need to tackle climate change by giving huge areas of land over to biofuels, or that questioning GM crops is anti-science or anti-progress, or that large-scale industrial agriculture is a way to feed the world, so on and so on and so on. Sometimes big stories in the name of sustainability, sustainable development. There's a certain type of powerful story, I think, that likes you to think that it's not a story at all. It's the future, take it. I don't know if you can see that says embrace technology. And it just demonstrates that you can't even have a quiet beer anymore without someone ramming a techno-utopian future down your throat. I think when we hear these big stories being repeated as fact, when sustainability is just presented as a technical issue or a scientific problem to be solved by experts, I think a massive alarm bell should ring. A sustainability klaxon, if you will. Some people enjoy that slide, other people not so much. Don't worry, there are other slides. I'm interested in how we can tell different stories, little stories that challenge some of these assumptions about the way the world should be. The STEPS Centre focuses on poor and marginalised people in developing countries and the different possible futures that they can see for themselves. So I'd like to share a couple of examples of what we do. There's a STEPS project which looks at people on the edge of Delhi in India, in an industrial town called Ghaziabad, which has changed a lot in a very short space of time, become much more industrialised. The problem there is poor people are not getting access to water or to clean water. The big official story in Delhi is the government is providing access to all in the context of water scarcity. And through the research that the project did, you see that there's a massive array of a complex network of agencies who are supposed to deal with this, which is like a massive spider's web. The problem is they don't work together well, and they're not equipped to deal with things like uncertainty and informality and rapid change, and they can't. The system can't cope with things like corruption and politics. So you get this situation where there's a massive water pipe running slap bang through a poor area, which might not even be on the map, on the way to the middle class areas. And people are having to run across a railway line to get to the nearest pump. So it's a fairly dangerous situation. So what about the little stories here? There's this incredible ingenuity of people illegally tapping into the water supply, building their own DIY irrigation systems. There's also stories of pollution and illness. And a lot of everyday life revolves around water. And there's a whole set of beliefs and stories about water as well. It's central to a mythology of different religions. So exposing the big story and telling these little stories, I think, creates a kind of disruption. So it's easier to put your finger on what the problem is and maybe start doing something about it. So in this project, we used film and photos and a mini graphic novel as well, as well as more traditional research publications, to tell some of these little stories. So these are a couple of pictures from that graphic novel. That were done by a guy called Bhagwati Prasad in the Indian heartland. I love this quote by Sheila Jasanoff about what social science is for. It's to render more visible the connections and the unseen patterns that modern societies taken pains to conceal. It's the idea it's actually quite important for those in power to try and disguise certain stories and certain connections, pretend they don't exist. What is it, for example, about the story of inevitable progress towards large-scale industrial agriculture enhanced by biotechnology and supported by corporate investment that makes it such an attractive prospect for agricultural development in Africa? And who wins and who loses from that story? So here's another example from the STEP Centre. It's a project about climate change and crops in Kenya. And there have been a lot of droughts in the last couple of decades. People are wanting to respond to climate change. And the big story there is that science and technology will fix the problem. The scientists will deliver new drought-tolerant seeds to poor farmers through a kind of pipeline where farmers are the end customers of the seeds. And what our project did was to go to some small farmers in a very dry region called Sakai, where they farm maize. And we listened to their stories and looked at how they actually make choices about which seeds or crops to use and how that fits in with their daily life. And we used a technique called multi-criteria mapping to identify the farmers' criteria for making their choices. Like, how important is the cost of seed versus how important is cooking for your selection of crop? And we asked them to think about what they could do differently in response to these droughts and to rank the different futures that they imagined for themselves. So you get something like this. You get the different futures down the side and then the rank that different people have. And we compared the data from the small farmers, the ranking from the small farmers, and we compared it to what lots of other different groups thought the farmers should be doing. So seed companies, scientists, policymakers, etc., and what they thought the criteria were. And the stories turn out to be different. And the little stories start to challenge the big story that everyone thought was obvious. So by comparing these and exposing these stories, we're saying the big story is not the only game in town. There's always other pathways and possibilities, however much some people would like to deny them. And it starts with listening to people and taking them seriously. Because stories don't operate in a vacuum. The big stories are kind of swimming in a sea of institutions and social and environmental change shaped by politics and power. So in this context, telling a different story is a profoundly political act. So when we see these big stories, we need to look at who is winning and losing. We need to open up the debate about the future to include more people, more kinds of knowledge. It's not only more fun and interesting, I think you get a better result.